Hello, friends, and welcome to the very first episode of Fact Checking the Fact Checkers, where I call out fact checkers for gaslighting their readers. That's right. Who would have thought that the mainstream media would lie to their readers? Who would have thought that they would use their First Amendment right of the freedom of the press to squelch the First Amendment right of the freedom of speech of everyday Americans that they happen to disagree with? On the banner of the Washington Post, I see democracy dies in darkness. And they put that up as a protest against Donald Trump, right? Because they believe Donald Trump is a bulwark against the press, that he's a threat to free speech, he's a threat to journalists. And I find that laughable in so many ways. And I won't even get into asking the rhetorical question of how many journalists has Donald Trump arrested and convicted of, doing their job, or how many journalists has the Justice Department of Trump wiretapped to try to find the source of whistleblowers versus Obama, right? But I won't even dive down that rabbit hole. That would be a story for a later date. But I believe that democracy truly dies when speech is not allowed or speech is no longer free. When you have media outlets such as the Washington Post that just become the mouthpiece of the mainstream political machine, right? And right now, the mainstream media is just the mouthpiece of the establishment Democrats. You saw it with the Hunter Biden story. You saw it with COVID. You saw it with anything regarding anything negative that would affect Biden. They squelched that story. They would not ask him any tough questions. And that's crazy. That's when democracy dies, is when the population becomes uneducated because the sources that you go to hopefully learn about what's going on in the country are just gaslighting you, saying, oh, there's no story here. Oh, they're just lying. Oh, we fact checked that. They're spreading disinformation. Oh, that's Russian disinformation. Oh, that's just propaganda. Oh, they lied 25,000 times. So I believe that's where democracy dies. Democracy dies when the media and establishment politicians just get in bed with each other and they just massage each other's backs, and journalists don't do their jobs. Journalists should not be in the business of being a PR agency for a political campaign. So, this story, The Biggest Pinocchios of 2020, written by the Washington Post and Glenn Kessler, is a textbook example of gaslighting. It's time for our annual roundup of the biggest Pinocchios of the year. Ever since President Trump burst onto the political scene in 2015, we have noted that we faced a challenge in not letting him dominate this list of the biggest falsehoods. The president is a serial exaggerator without parallel in U.S. politics. He not only consistently makes false claims, but also repeats them, in some cases hundreds of times, even though they have been proved wrong. In 2019, Trump took 7 of the 13 spots. He earned 6 spots in 2018 and 2017, 5 in 2016, and 3 in 2015. Even so, we cheated a bit because in some cases, Trump's false claims on a particular subject were so numerous and varied that we created all-around categories. So I'm going to take a minute and basically talk about, Trump being a serial exaggerator. They're basically saying Trump is a 74-year-old billionaire New Yorker who exaggerates about everything, and that's how he became a 74-year-old billionaire in New York with his name in gold letters on the side of a tower, owning hotels and golf courses around the world, right? He is a TV star, was a TV star. Right now he's sort of, an outcast, but that's how he created a name for himself. He said crazy things and people would go, oh, what did Trump say? What did Trump do? Oh, I want to know more about what's going on. He was a social icon. People wanted to be like Trump. People wanted to be successful. And to say, oh, well, he's a serial exaggerator. That's what he does. That's how he became successful. That's how he became the president, whether you like it or not. Continuing with the story, the explosion of false and misleading statements from Trump during his presidency is well documented in our database. We have struggled to keep up with his torrent of falsehoods during the final weeks of the campaign, when he barnstormed the country, making 600 to 700 false or misleading claims a week. The next update will show he crossed the 25,000 mark by mid-October. Okay, so question. If I prove that the Washington Post fact check was wrong, will they say Trump only lied 24,999 times? Or are they just going to keep on keeping on and pretend like they're not spreading misinformation? So in this remarkable year, we have given up trying to keep Trump to about half the list. In 2020, Trump will earn 7 of 10 spots with 3 all-around categories: his false claims about the coronavirus pandemic, the U.S. election, and the violence that erupted after the death of George Floyd in police custody, which is actually what I'm going to be focusing on for this episode. President-elect Joe Biden earns 2 spots, while the last slot goes to a GOP hopeful in the Senate race. I'm surprised Joe Biden only earned 2 spots because of the 2 presidential candidates in the 2020 election. I believe only one candidate has ever dropped out of a campaign for having lied and committed plagiarism. So there's that. So nevertheless, this may be Trump's last appearance on this annual list. As of January 21st, we will set a high bar for fact-checking his statements. He will be a defeated ex-president, and we tend to focus on claims made by people in power. In other words, we hope to ignore him and concentrate on people who really matter in national policy debates. So I guess they're ignoring the fact that they consistently talk with Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and kind of just trip and fall over themselves every time they seem to open their mouth, right? Because last time I checked, Trump didn't win in 2016. Hillary lost that election. There was really no way Trump should have won that election. But Hillary Clinton was such a bad candidate and Barack Obama did such a poor job as president that somehow Trump became the president of the United States of America. So there's that. And they're failing to realize that even ex-presidents have a ton of influence, and influence in the world of politics is power. If you have influence, if you know people, if you have the right connections and the wherewithal, you have more power than a lot of people. You have more power than politicians because technically you just be outside of the system. That's why so many politicians become lobbyists, because they make all those connections and then they become filthy rich lobbying on behalf of these huge multinational corporations. So in compiling this list, we mostly focus on claims that earned 4 Pinocchios during the year. To keep it simple, in some cases, we have shortened or paraphrased the quotes in the headlines. To read the full column, click on the link embedded in the quote. The all-around categories have links within the summaries. We generally do not list the Pinocchios of the year in any particular order, but the collection of coronavirus and election claims are especially consequential. The president's statements affected both the health of U.S. citizens and American democracy and will undoubtedly influence how historians assess performance as president. Okay, so that's kind of a loaded sentence, right? So the president's statements affected both the health of U.S. citizens and American democracy. So the health of U.S. citizens, I understand that Trump exaggerated a bit, downplayed the virus at the beginning, but you have to understand that your role as a leader, whether you like it or not, is to downplay panic. And for these news organizations to say, well, Americans don't panic, or Americans wouldn't have panicked, or you don't know what would have happened. No, I know exactly what would have happened, because just like you, did you go to the store to buy toilet paper and they were sold out of toilet paper for weeks? That is called panic buying. So imagine if Trump would have come out and said, this is the worst thing ever. This is the most infectious, communicable, whatever. And we don't have any way of stopping this and everybody's going to catch it and blah, blah, blah. Could you imagine the chaos that would have emerged from that? No, you have to downplay it. You have to keep panic from setting in, because again, like with the example of toilet paper, that is the need for increased usage of toilet paper is not a symptom of coronavirus, yet we were sold out of that for months. And that's insane. And for the news organizations to say, well, Americans don't panic, Americans would not have panicked, that is complete nonsense. And all you have to do is look at something in which Americans did panic. They panic bought toilet paper and milk and cheese and a bunch of dairy products, and everything was sold out when everybody panicked at the beginning. So don't even tread down that path, because as a leader, part of your job is to keep panic from setting in, because once panic starts, it's hard to stop. And when people panic, people do stupid things. And usually that leads to more death, whether you like it or not. And his threats on the American democracy, that's laughable coming from the Washington Post. They have tons of opinion pieces on how Trump was trying to suppress the vote throughout the country using the Postal Service and his defunding, removal of mailboxes, sorting machines, what have you. So don't even say that, he was undermining American democracy by trying to challenge to the legal process, when for months leading up to the election, you were claiming that the vote was going to be suppressed. And then after the election, when it was an all-time record high for votes, and he comes out and says, well, this seems like a mathematical impossibility, maybe we should look into it. You say, well, there's no impossibility. Well, didn't you just say for months that there was going to be unprecedented voter suppression? How is votes at an all-time high? Well, shut up. You lost the election. Our guy won. Have a good day. Right? So it's crazy. You can't have it both ways. You can't claim voter suppression, and then when there was obviously no voter suppression, or anti-voter suppression, I suppose, then claim that there was nothing that had gone wrong during the elections. So that's my opinion on that. So, like I said, what I want to focus in on this video is the bogus violence claims. So, the killing of George Floyd, a black man in Minneapolis, by police led to a national reckoning on race. But Trump saw the incident as a way to gain an electoral edge, so he repeatedly hyped claims about professional anarchists, violent mobs or arsonists, looters, criminals, rioters, Antifa, and others. Antifa is a moniker, not a single group with a clear organizational structure or leader. And no cases could be found in which someone who self-identifies as Antifa led violent acts at protests across the country. Okay, so that is a statement basically stating that what Trump is saying is false. Trump is saying Antifa is going around causing a ruckus, right? Antifa is capitalizing on the death of George Floyd by damaging cities, vandalizing property, killing people, harassing people, assaulting people, right? And the author of this piece, Mr. Kessler, is claiming that there is no evidence, no cases could be found in which someone who self-identifies as Antifa led violent acts at protests across the country. His source is from June 22nd, 2020. And, I could have took the easy way out. I could be talking about Chaz Chop. I could be talking about the Red House Autonomous Zone. Heck, I could even talk about what happened last night. New Year, same goal. Antifa militants firebomb Portland police, smash local businesses. This is from the Post Millennial, posted today, actually. Ringing in the new year, Antifa militants rioted in downtown Portland outside the federal courthouse, launching commercial-grade fireworks and multiple Molotov cocktail-style firebombs at local police officers, right? But again, I don't want to be that person where I source something from the future, because technically that's what I'm doing. I would be sourcing something that happened a week after the article was released. And that would be unfair. That would be something that the Washington Post would do to any conservative voice. So I wanted to be as charitable as possible while debunking their fact check. So I found this article from voanews.com from September 1st, 2020, 3 months before this article was published. Antifa protester implicated in killing of Trump supporter in Oregon. Washington. For the first time, a self-identified member of the militant movement known as ANTIFA has been implicated in a fatal shooting and is reportedly under investigation in the killing of a supporter of President Donald Trump on Saturday in Portland, Oregon. The left-wing protest movement has resorted to violent measures in the past in opposition to right-wing extremist groups, but has stopped short of lethal tactics. So, not a single group with a clear organizational structure, and no cases could be found in which someone who self-identifies as Antifa, in the title, self-identifies as Antifa, led a violent act at a protest across the country. So in Portland, Oregon, a member someone who self-identifies as Antifa shot a Trump supporter in the chest. Fact check false. This individual is spreading misinformation and is just gaslighting the readers of the Washington Post. And like I said, this is how democracy dies in darkness, because people are just listening to the establishment talking points. They're listening to what the government wants them to hear. And by government, I don't mean what the president wants them to hear. I mean what the establishment wants them to hear. And that's dangerous. The White House tweeted and later deleted a 58-second video that employed out-of-context social clips to lob unproven accusations and create a misleading impression of what has happened during the Floyd protest. Trump himself tweeted an outrageous conspiracy theory about a Buffalo man injured by police. He has also falsely claimed that Obama never tried to tackle the problem of police brutality during his presidency. I agree that Trump did lie about that. That is a false statement, right? So Trump is trying to create an equivalence between being unsuccessful at doing something and not having attempted it. Just because Obama really didn't achieve anything doesn't mean he didn't try to achieve anything. So, Trump did lie. And he repeatedly and falsely said that Biden supported efforts to defund police. So, okay, so they're making a claim that Trump is falsely claiming that Biden supports efforts to defund the police. So why would Donald Trump make that assertion, right? So this article is from BBC News from September 7th, 2020, U.S. 2020 election. Does Joe Biden support defunding the police? It's written by Jake Horton, BBC Reality Check, right? President Trump has claimed that his Democratic rival for presidency, Joe Biden, supports the idea of defunding the police. Mr. Biden says he will not take money away from police forces. He wants to invest in community projects and social programs to lessen the burden on police. There have been calls to divert money from the police to spend on other services after the death of George Floyd at the hands of a Minneapolis police officer in May. Right? So that third paragraph right there have been calls to divert money. That is how you would defund the police, right? So you would divert money away from the police and you spend it on other social programs. So that is how you would defund the police. So, why is Biden accused of supporting defunding, right? In an interview Mr. Biden gave in July led to accusations that he did support taking money from the police after an edited version was posted on Twitter by Republican Congressman Steve Scalise. In this version, Mr. Biden answers yes to a question about whether he agrees with redirecting funding. President Trump referred to this when addressing the Republican Party convention, adding that if Mr. Biden became president, the radical left will defund police departments across America. But the video, as posted by Mr. Scalise, was flagged by Twitter as manipulated because of the way the words "for police" were edited into the question about funding. In the unedited original, the interviewer, A.D. Barkin, says, "We can reduce the responsibilities assigned to the police and redirect some of the funding for police into social services, mental health counseling, and affordable housing." Joe Biden begins talking about various types of police reforms he wants to see when Mr. Barkin interrupts to ask, "But do we agree that we can redirect some of the funding?" He doesn't mention the word police in the question, but Mr. Biden anyway responds, "Yes, absolutely." Republican Steve Scalise deleted his Twitter post with that video clip, but defended his view that Mr. Biden was talking about police funding. The Biden campaign called the edited video a deep fake. So let's kind of break down what's going on in this, right? So A.D. Barkin says, "We can reduce the responsibilities assigned to the police and redirect some of the funding for police into social services, mental health counseling, and affordable housing." So we can reduce responsibilities and take some of that remaining money that's not going to be used because the police responsibilities are less, and use that remaining balance to fund other projects, right? Social services, mental health counseling, and affordable housing. Joe Biden, being a 50-year politician, being a law professor, I believe, knows that, hey, I do not want to get painted into this corner. I do not want to have to answer this question. I am going to pivot. And by pivoting, I am going to talk about various types of police reforms I would like to see. But Mr. Barkin just interrupts them and says, but do we agree we can redirect some of that funding? And what Mr. Barkin is talking about is we can reduce the responsibilities assigned to police and redirect some of that funding for police into social services, right? So Mr. Barkin is talking about the police. And so when he asked that question, do we agree we can redirect some of that funding? Joe Biden is a 50-year politician. He is a law professor. He is a lawyer. You can't say that Joe Biden didn't know what he was talking about, right? So even though Mr. Barkin didn't reiterate the word, didn't basically reaffirm the subject of police, right? Biden would know that he is referring to the police. Biden can't make the claim, oh, I thought he was talking about the ASPCA. I thought he was talking about the fire department, not the police department. Whoa, why would I support defunding the police department? I thought he was talking about the ASPCA. That's insane to even to propose that, right? And to call that a deep fake, because I believe every time I read a news article where they take out a short kind of blurb from a quote and they kind of pull it out of context, but they need to give some context to it because you don't really know what they're talking about. So they'll put brackets and they'll put that context into that. They'll plug it into the quote. That way you understand what they're talking about. That way you don't need to read 3 paragraphs and you can just read, but do you agree that we can redirect some of the funding? Open brackets for police, close bracket. And Biden responds, yes, absolutely, right? So that's how a journalist would actually write that story, from my understanding. And that's how you would actually put that in. So I don't understand how that would be considered a deep fake, because all you're doing is giving context to the story. And that's your job as a journalist. And for the Biden campaign to say, oh, that's a deep fake, then what was Biden talking about? If we can redirect the funding, what are we redirecting some of the money from? And they never say that. They never said what Biden was talking about, right? So if Mr. Barkin was talking about the police and the whole conversation was about the police, and Mr. Barkin asks about defunding, and we can redirect some of that funding, and Biden agrees to that, then Joe Biden is agreeing to that. That's how the English language works. This whole double speak, double talk, changing the way we speak is so disingenuous. And that is also gaslighting, because, well, what is speech if it's not consistent, right? What is language? It's a method for communication. And if we're changing the way in which we communicate in arbitrary ways just to fit your personal narrative, how are we supposed to have a conversation? How are we supposed to communicate if you're changing the meaning of words from one day to the next to mean something innocent to something nefarious, from something, just policy-wise? Hey, do you think we should do this? Well, technically, I don't believe in defunding. I just think we should take money away from them and send it someplace else. So it's pretty funny, because who does support defunding the police? It's the next section in the article. There are some high-profile Democrats who support a reduction in funding. New York Congresswoman AOC is among the proponents of defunding the police department and reinvesting the money in local communities. New York Mayor Bill de Blasio has moved to cut $1 billion from the city's police department budget, shifting the funds to youth programs, although Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez has said this was achieved through budget tricks. The LA Mayor Eric Garcetti has taken $150 million from the police department budget to spend on other local programs. So basically, they're doing what Mr. Barkin asked. He said, can we reduce some of the responsibilities assigned to police and redirect that remaining funds into social services, mental health counseling, affordable housing, right? That is defunding the police. And that's what Mr. Barkin was asking Mr. Biden. And Mr. Biden said, well, yes, absolutely, we can do that. And he originally wanted to pivot, but I don't know if it's because of his advanced age, or maybe that's how he truly feels. Maybe he just got confused. And honestly, if you're saying Joe Biden was confused about the question, do you understand that Mr. Biden is going to be the president of the United States, having to communicate with other world leaders? And if he's being tricked with something as simple as whether or not he wants to defund the police, do you really want this man in charge of making military decisions that would implicate us in wars across the world? That is crazy. How could you, if Joe Biden's incapable of having a conversation of whether or not he wants to defund the police and he gets lost in that conversation, then he shouldn't be involved in the conversation of whether or not we should enter a war into Syria, or if we should declare war on whatever country hacked us a couple months ago. There's a lot of war hawk talk coming from the Biden campaign, and I don't know if I want that person in charge of our military when they get confused in a question about defunding the police, and his campaign has to go, well, that's a deep fake, because obviously the word police wasn't actually ever in the question, but the entire conversation was about the police. So that's pretty disingenuous. So like I said at the very beginning, democracy does die in darkness. But it's not the darkness from, Trump squelching the press. Democracy dies in darkness when the press becomes politics, when journalists can no longer tell the truth, when journalists can no longer be objective, when journalists lie to you. They're just actively gaslighting. I just showed you an example. This gentleman gave an example that was 6 months old, saying, oh, look, no links to Antifa for any violence. Well, an article 3 months later, Antifa was involved in a shooting of a Trump supporter, right? So that's pretty disingenuous. That is lying. That is spreading disinformation. And honestly, the Washington Post should be ashamed of themselves. They claim to be an authority in news, and it's not like I had to do a lot of work to figure this out. So hopefully this is received well. Let me know what you guys think of the audio, the video. This is my first video, so I'm not 100% sure how everything's going to turn out post-production. So why don't you go ahead and like, subscribe, leave a comment down below. If you like it or if you hate it, just let me know. Hopefully I'll be posting a couple of these a week. So y'all have a good one. Later. Bye.